Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 3rd of July, 2024, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me in the studio today, we're back in the studio, Charles Malet.
Thank you, Mike. Good afternoon, all.
And Vanessa Beeley from Damascus. We'll get started with the general election. And, we just want to begin by saying good luck to everybody that's standing as an independent. We've put Andrew Bridgen on here as being possibly the most well-known independent. But nonetheless, lots of people standing as independents, and also good luck to anybody standing in some of the smaller parties that generally don't get any media coverage whatsoever. And we'll see how that goes tomorrow. Nobody is holding out for a terribly satisfactory result as across the board. No matter who wins, whether it's Tory or Labour. I think we know who it's likely to be. But in Northern Ireland, the issue is around the DUP, of course. And here is Sir, what's his name? My goodness, how can I? Jeffrey Donaldson, thank you. Sir Jeffrey Donaldson, who is back in court today on allegations of abusing sexual impropriety, let's put it that way. And his wife also in court on charges of aiding and abetting. And this, of course, leaves the DUP in a bit of trouble, and we wait to see what the result of that is going to be. Meanwhile, in France, of course, what have we got over there? We've got Marine Le Pen apparently on the verge of success. So Macron called this snap election because of what happened at the European parliamentary elections. But it seems that the French electorate not so happy with him. So they obviously, although it was inconclusive in the first round, Marine Le Pen was very successful at that. It wasn't decisive, but that continues. But I just thought this tweet, Charles, was fantastic from Kenneth Ross. At stake in the French and US elections are the defense of Ukraine's democratic future from Putin's colonial invasion, and with it the prospects for democracy in Europe. The far right has a different plan. And I had to respond to this on Twitter by saying, yeah, peace. Because, it is an incredible situation that now if you are pro-peace, you're labelled as far right. And you're apparently feared by the mainstream.
Absolutely. That's completely the way it's gone, and it will continue to go, I think. I mean, it's relentless.
Yes. So we'll see what the result is tomorrow. At least we'll see what the result is on Friday. But the voting taking place tomorrow, and hopefully Andrew Bridgen will succeed, as will many of the other independents. But in the meantime, as we talked about earlier on, just after the election was called, there was a wash-up in legislation and so on. But it's not just legislation, it's affected by the election.
No, it's not. And in addition to talking about independents and the struggles that they face, we've talked about the systemic issues which restrict what we might consider to be the democratic process. We'll just go through the wash-up as it is described by Parliament, by the House of Commons, which in effect means that certain bits of legislation that were in Parliament are effectively scratched. And here we see that on the prorogation of Parliament on the 24th, there were just 2 days for a wash-up. So rather than looking at what did get through, we'll look at what didn't. And of course, on the government side, which is of significance, the Criminal Justice Bill, therefore hanging in the balance and effectively has been wiped off the slate for now. But and just a reminder, that contained things about nuisance begging and certain prevention orders, which we've spoken about many times before. On the private members' bill side, again, things we've touched on in the past, the Disestablishment of the Church of England bill, which we'll come on to contextualise later. The Fetal Sentience Committee bill, again, which was hijacked by the pro-abortion lobby. The Police Declaration bill, essentially trying to create a situation by which police would have to declare membership of and affiliations to certain societies, the sites of special scientific interest concerning Natural England in particular, and then, of course, the Holocaust Memorial Bill, which is worth noting because it's a hybrid bill, and therefore, because of its status as a hybrid bill, it says that on the 22nd of May, or rather, sorry, after the motion on 22nd of May, the bill could be reintroduced in the new Parliament. Well, now, given the sort of airtime and the influence behind it, I would suggest that absolutely it will be seen again. And a reminder on the petitions front that if you have started a petition or signed a petition to the government A reminder that that has all been wiped as well, so will have to be started again after the election. Now, the other thing we've talked about, of course, is the nature of information. And in particular, I've talked about Ofcom and the Electoral Commission, the process by which independent candidates are, in effect, suppressed and pushed out of the media space and indeed the public space. So it is an information war. And on that front, I'd highlight a report just published by Global Witness, in which they say that an investigation reveals content posted by bot-like accounts on X has been seen 150 million times ahead of the UK elections, and they think this is cause for concern. Now, I've titled this slide, "What about AI?" because they say that when the conversation we're seeing online isn't authentic because it comes from bots, accounts run by computers that have been programmed to look like humans, then there is cause for huge concern. Now, the reason, of course, I've made the reference to AI is that in every other arena, in effect, we are being told repeatedly that content that is created by humans for computers to operate supposedly generatively and independently is absolutely the thing that we do want. And yet, of course, in this situation, they are choosing to take the opposite line. Now, scratching the surface and finding out where Global Witness's influences, funding and alliances come from, we'll just have a quick look at some of those that are involved. Now, Simon Taylor, co-founder of Global Witness, also involved and in the launch in 2002 with George Soros and other NGOs, including Transparency International and Save the Children Fund. And then we've got Patrick Alley, another co-founder, involved, or at least as a former president, described by a former president of the Open Society Foundations, as somebody who's helped bring together issues of human rights, corruption, the trade in natural resources, and so forth. And then we've got Fatima Hassan, who's a South African human rights lawyer, but she led the Open Society Foundation for South Africa for 6 years, which of course is associated with Soros. Now, as if to prove my point that Global Witness is in effect a tool of censorship, I put a video on X, Twitter, this morning, and Kenny, who knows more about tech than I ever will, put it into the Google Gemini AI program and asked it to do something for him.
Well, he was asking it to summarize the video and write a little bit of context for it.
Exactly so. And highlighted in red there, it says that it removed the mention of Soros funding to avoid perpetuating conspiracy theories, and it shortened the sentence about social media censorship. Now, I never suggested anything other than the fact there was a link between Soros and the Open Society Foundations and Global Witness, which is evident on their website. Now, this takes us towards Ofcom, which of course is to be regulating this space and other spaces besides. So just a reminder really of the part about the funding of Ofcom, and he who pays the piper calls the tune. So as they state in this article, we want to address some misunderstandings about how we're funded. Contrary to what some people think, Ofcom is not funded directly by taxpayers or the government. Most of Ofcom's funding comes from fees paid to us by the companies we regulate. Now, you will have watched enough UK column news about the MHRA to know that that is not a sensible system to get people to mark their own homework. But nonetheless, that is in fact how Ofcom is structured. So we look at something from their annual reports. They say strengthening Ofcom for the future. I say strengthening censorship. And they say that to develop our understanding of the technologies used to deliver online services, as we prepare to regulate online safety, it remains a priority to stay ahead of industry changes. And to ensure this, they've invested in learning and development and conducted specialist recruitment. Now, what would that mean? Well, it means that they're going to deepen their understanding of the technology industries. They've hired colleagues from Meta, Google, and bodies such as the Internet Watch Foundation and NSPCC. In October 2021, we welcomed a new Chief Technology Officer from Amazon with a brief to oversee the growth of our technology, data engineering, and analytics functions. So, given the background to this, and as discussed at the start, the suppression that we've seen of particularly independent candidates, it seems more clear and more likely than ever that regardless of the result of the general election result, it'll be the corporate and supranational influences upon the new government that will continue to push the censorship mechanism, control mechanism, and all the measures that come with it in the same direction. But of course, we wait and see exactly how that's going to manifest.
Indeed. Now, on the subject of censorship and on the subject of trust, because trust is very closely linked to censorship, the lower the trust in the mainstream media, then the more censorship of alternative narratives goes on. Quite a number of people were pushing a report by Statista around the social media over the last couple of days. This was from June the 28th. And the question is, where do people distrust news media? And this is from Florence Ant. And he's saying the rise of mis and disinformation on social media and increasing perception of bias in the reporting of legacy media outlets has led to trust in media institutions declining over the past years. As a result, Statista Consumer Insight survey of 38 countries shows whether people trust or distrust the media. And how it differs by geographical region. So let's just bring their graph on screen so that we can have a look at this. And this is where do people, brackets, distrust news media, share of respondents who don't trust mainstream media in their country of residence. And they're showing that the UK, the United States, parts of South America, Australia, India are sitting around the 16 to 20% of people not trusting the mainstream news media. In Canada, in Brazil, in South Africa, parts of Europe, Republic of Ireland, China, it's around the 10 to 15%. France is doing pretty well there at 21 to 27%, according to this particular survey. And they're saying this is 1,000 to 10,000 online respondents, 18 to 64 years per country surveyed between April 2023 and March 2024. So that's what they're saying. But those statistics to me seemed a bit low based on what we'd seen in many other similar surveys over the years. So maybe Statista should have done some looking at their own data from previous years. So let's bring this one on screen. News consumers with a great deal or quite a lot of confidence in the press in the United Kingdom as of September 2022 by generation. And we see that the percentage of pre-war, so that's people in their, I suppose, 70s and 80s now, who have quite a lot or a great deal of confidence in the press in the UK. It's only 25%, and it goes down to 5% once we get to Generation Z or Gen Z. So, that doesn't seem to quite tally. I mean, I appreciate that one's looking at distrust and the other's looking at a great deal or quite a lot of confidence, but still the figures seem to be there's quite a bit of disparity there. And then if we look at the Press Gazette, now this is from 2023, the UK has the second lowest level of trust in press in survey of 24 countries. Only Egypt reported lower levels of trust in press than the UK. So this was from March 2023. And when they updated this in January 2024, trust in media, UK drops to last place in Edelman's survey of 28 nations. The annual survey asked how many people trust the media to do what is right. So I would suggest that the graphic that's being sent around social media at the moment on Statista is vastly underestimating the levels of distrust in the mainstream press that we have in the UK and across the world, particularly the Western world. And there are many other sets of data that might be a bit more accurate on this. But anyway, we'll talk more about this in extra, no doubt. Now let's move on then. We mentioned Egypt there, Vanessa. Let's welcome you to the program. Well, what is going on in Egypt at the moment?
Well, many things going on in Egypt, but I'm going to focus today on basically the EU debt quagmire that Egypt is being put into. So, report in the last couple of days from Politico, EU finalizes up to 1 billion in aid to Egypt as part of a migration deal, and similar deals were made with Tunisia, Mauritania, and Turkey to curb immigration from the Zionist genocide in the occupied territories and in Gaza into Europe. We saw a very similar affair, of course, during the regime change war in Syria and the migration crisis from Syria into Europe, which was being basically damned, as in putting an obstacle by Turkey. So I apologize for this very creepy photograph of our favorite von der Leyen on the left meeting with President Sisi in Cairo a couple of days ago. And why am I comparing it to von der Leyen and Zelensky? Because in my opinion, Egypt is rapidly heading towards becoming the Ukraine of West Asia. It is absolutely mired in debt. So the EU on Saturday finalized a deal for the disbursement of up to 1 billion. The overall fund that is being given by the EU to Egypt is above 7 billion. But this is basically macro financial assistance within their partnership geared at curbing irregular migration and boosting the North Africa country's economy. Signed a memorandum of understanding for the financing during the EU-Egypt investment conference in Cairo that included President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi and European Commission President von der Leyen. And if we look at what they're actually going to be investing in, as I said, compare this to Ukraine, where, of course, much of Ukraine's resources and industry has been taken over by foreign investors. The EU-Egypt partnership has been strongly criticized by human rights groups who see it as another EU cash for migrant control deal. The macro-financial assistance of up to 1 billion will provide a total of up to 5 billion in favorable loans to Egypt. The agreed policy actions covers 3 pillars: promoting macroeconomic stability, improving the business environment, enhancing Egypt's competitiveness, and supporting Egypt's green transition. They also signed the Green Sustainable Industry Programme, supported by 30 million EU grant to help Egyptian industry to invest in pollution reduction, decarbonisation, energy and resource efficiency, and 3 financing agreements worth a total of 36 million as part of bilateral cooperation programs. But then let's have a look at Egypt's entire debt. So total debt is 165 billion, which I actually think is underestimated, including 28% to Gulf Arab states, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, and others, including Jordan, that have heavily invested and actually effectively bought up sectors of Egyptian territory, particularly within the Sinai and on the Red Sea coast. I've actually written at my Substack a series of 3 articles talking, first of all, about the economic trap, and then Sisi deepening ties, both economic, trade, and so on. In fact, during 2024, Egypt's exports to Israel soared, as did the UAE and Jordan, despite the fact that Israel is conducting a genocide in Gaza. And then finally, the mafia bosses that are running the business, and including the Gaza file for Sisi in the Sinai. Now, this was put out by WikiLeaks yesterday. A verified document from the Israeli Ministry of Intelligence in October 2023 suggests ethnic cleansing, forced displacement of Gaza civilians to Egypt would yield positive and long-term strategic results. The document envisions a 3-stage process, including the establishment of tent cities in Sinai and the opening of humanitarian corridor, followed by a construction of cities in northern Sinai from which there would be no return. Now, we have actually reported on this previously, but I did take a very quick look at the document. And if we see, the document also states that the US must be harnessed. This is translated from Hebrew, so the English might be a bit all over the place. The United States effectively must be harnessed for a move to put pressure on Egypt to absorb Gaza residents and to harness other European countries, in particular Greece, Spain, and Canada isn't European, but you get the picture, to help absorb and settle the refugees who will be evacuated through Gaza. The document was said not to be distributed through the US office to officials, but only to Israeli government and security. And then further on in the report on the document, in relation to the difficulty that Egypt will have an obligation in international law to allow a population transition, because Egypt is objecting to mass migration of Gazan refugees into the Sinai, although we have also reported on the fact that Egypt has apparently been preparing an open-air compound on the Egyptian side of the Rafah border. I think that was back earlier this year. The US can contribute to the move by exerting pressure on Egypt, Turkey, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the Emirates to contribute to the initiative or resources or absorption of displaced persons. So what I believe is effectively going on here, Egypt has very little control or very little sovereignty right now. As I said, it's completely mired in debt. What we are seeing are financial incentives and incentives of cooperation and collaboration from the EU and from the IMF, which I think is going to be used to leverage Egypt in the future to accept refugees from Gaza.
Vanessa, assuming that this is the plan and they intend to build these tent cities and then eventually build real cities to accommodate these people, what's Egypt's attitude to the Palestinians? Will they eventually see Palestinians being brought into mainstream Egyptian society, or are they going to try to build a further wall around this new infrastructure?
Yeah, I mean, this is what I expect will happen if this goes ahead. As I said, all of these plans are effectively plans. Nothing concrete is being put into action right now. And Egypt publicly is saying, very vehemently that it doesn't agree to Gazan refugees coming into the Sinai. The main reason it doesn't want that, of course, is then it considers that will put Egypt at risk of being attacked by Israel if Hamas continues their resistance from inside Egyptian territory. But in my opinion, with the mass investment by the UAE and Saudi Arabia, particularly in the Sinai, to build luxury settlements and projects akin to the NEOM project, which we've also talked about previously, they will want to basically segregate the Palestinians and put them behind apartheid walls, very similar to those that, of course, we've seen in the occupied territories built by the Zionists to hide them from view. Basically, that's my opinion.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much for that. Okay, let's move on. If you like what the UK column does, you would like to support us, please go to support.ukcolumn.org. All the options for helping us out are there. We do need your support. It is you that keeps us going. So thank you very much to everybody that has and continues to support us. You could share anything you find on the platforms, especially ukcolumn.org and ukcolumnextracts.co.uk. Facebook's still not available to us at this point in time. We'll keep you posted on that. And do pick something up at the UK Column shop if you possibly can. Another reminder of Your Life in Their Hands, which is available to get from the shop at the moment. Thank you very much to everybody that has grabbed a copy of this. If you haven't got one yet, please do get hold of a copy and let others see it as well, because the information is extremely relevant to what people are experiencing in their councils and local areas as Agenda 2030 and Agenda 21 is implemented. Now, a quick update. David Leahy, who's standing as an independent parliamentary candidate in St Ives in Cornwall, was speaking to Brian a couple of days ago. That's on the UK Column website. If you haven't seen that yet, please have a look. It's still not too late to share that if you think it'll influence anybody in St Ives. Tomorrow at 1 p.m, Brian will be speaking to J. Michael Waller. So do join us. This is the second interview with J. Michael Waller, and join us for that if you possibly can. And a date for your diary is Saturday the 19th of October in Bristol, where we will be really live in front of, hopefully a reasonably sized audience. We'll get to say hello to everybody. Do join us for that if you can. Keep that date in mind. Now, of course, over the weekend, we were at the Sounds Beautiful Festival. And if you were watching the UK Column News on Monday, you will have seen the news program that we hosted while we were there. But a fantastic event, Charles.
Yeah, it absolutely was. And of course, what you couldn't see was the audience. So it's absolutely lovely to have that face-to-face direct contact. And I'm sure you could hear the response to what we did, and indeed the question and answer session at the end. So to get out there and be with other people was absolutely fantastic. A really well run festival as well. So many thanks to all those who had a part in it, and to those who turned up to say hello and support the work of UK Column.
And even the weather mostly cooperated.
It did,
yes.
surprisingly.
Yes, okay. And a quick advert for this going on Sunday the 7th. So that'll be this Sunday, I guess, in Bath. Do you trust your council? Now, this is Bath and North East Somerset Council. They've signed you up to a smart city trial, according to this advertisement. And the question is, do you consent? So join the Rally for Sanity. And that is on the 7th at 2 p.m. at the Guildhall, which is at the Bathness Council building in Bath. So join them for that if you can. Where does that take us? Juries. Now, we have been talking about juries for quite a long time. It is a fundamental part of our national infrastructure and part of our fundamental part of our freedom, actually. And most people don't understand the role of juries. So I was quite interested to see this article in the Guardian yesterday. Activists arrested on suspicion of contempt after London court protests. So this was 11 people that were outside a Crown Court and we're holding up various banners and placards trying to explain the role of a jury. 11 arrested, it says in the subheadline there, after holding placards outside court. The judge said could be interpreted as interference with a jury. I think if we're talking about interference with a jury, we need to be looking at what judges are doing with respect to juries. But anyway, what the Guardian didn't say anything about was the group that was actually involved in this protest. So here's their website. It's called Defend Our Juries. Now I'm going to say straight out here, this is not the type of group that people watching the UK Column News, I would imagine, would be wanting to support, because these people are mainly linked to climate protests and so on. But I have to say that in terms of explaining the situation with juries, that website does quite a lot to explain it in a very clear and concise way. So if you can suspend your disbelief on the climate issue, I recommend reading what it is that they say. And, well, we can talk a little bit more about this in a second, but let's just look at a little bit of video from that website and see what they have to say.
We have this right in the UK, which is really, really important, and it's been there since 1670, and it's the right of juries to acquit a defendant based on their conscience. So regardless of what a judge thinks or what the government of the day thinks or what the media think, but on their conscience. And this right is really, it's the kind of puts the moral sense of ordinary people at the heart of our criminal justice system.
The blank banners at the moment, they're becoming a bit of a signifier for just how gagged defendants and protesters are becoming across this nation of ours, and indeed across the rest of the world as well. They're becoming a symbol of resistance in themselves.
In recent months, a retired social worker in her 60s held up a sign which was pertaining to that right of juries to acquit according to their conscience. And she was arrested by order of a judge and threatened with imprisonment. And 24 others since then have been threatened with the same thing for the same action.
So they're describing it as acquittal on their conscience. We might call it annulment by jury or jury nullification. We've been talking about this for many, many years. But let's just have a look at the ways that the juries are being undermined at the moment. So banning those engaged in campaigns of political resistance from explaining their motives and beliefs to the jury. These are things that the judges tend to do. Telling the jury that motives, even if articulated, are irrelevant and must be ignored. That's commonplace. Banning references to a jury's right to acquit the defendant as a matter of conscience. Directing the jury that defences such as necessity, proportionality, or reasonable excuse are not available. And finally, threatening to move to judge-only trials. And this is this last one is a particular threat, but nonetheless, they're absolutely right in highlighting all those other instances. And of course, this doesn't just apply to people that are campaigning on climate issues. This applies to people that are campaigning and protesting on a whole raft of different issues. So again, you may feel that you don't want to support this particular group because they are pro-climate change, but we should be supporting the message here, because this is something that applies to everyone, not just people that are promoting the climate change narrative. Now, as I say, this is something that we have been talking about for many, many years. So this was something that we put on screen several years ago. We have been in constitutional crisis for years: breakup of the nation, city-states, abolition of juries, prevention of public oversight in court cases, removal of separation of powers, wholesale privatization of public services, investigatory powers, the power to do anything. The list does go on, but the jury is an absolutely fundamental constitutional freedom that we have in this country. It's a key part of the judicial system, and it's a key part of holding government to account. Now, if you don't understand what nullification by jury means, it means that, for example, if government passes a piece of legislation which a jury feels is inappropriate or doesn't work in a certain set of circumstances, the jury can find someone who's being prosecuted under that legislation innocent of any criminal offence. And of course, that sets a precedent in common law. So this is an extremely powerful tool for juries. It's something that most juries don't understand, and it's something that really needs much broader understanding. As I say, we've been talking about this for years. This is an article from Malcolm Massey in 2012, Jury Nullification, A Power of the People. It's quite a short article. If you haven't read it, please do read it, but most importantly, please do share it. And of course, we would encourage everybody to have a listen to A Dissident's Guide to the Constitution. And we talked about annulment by jury in episode 2 of that. So if you haven't heard that series, please listen to it. I cannot overstate the importance of this.
Yeah, and it is phenomenally important. And I think that you're absolutely right to point out that the group that you've referred to, by largely being composed of climate activists and perhaps sort of social justice warriors, as they might be referred to, should be in a way neither here nor there. And there are obvious examples that can be cited where jury nullification has played out in recent years, most notably those that were in court for criminal damage on the pushing of the statue of Edward Colston into the Bristol harbour and the smashing of enormous plate glass windows at a Barclays Bank building, and both were overturned by juries. But the key issue here, and this is exactly like the sort of defence of free speech, is that if you want to maintain the system, you have to accept the consequences, no matter what they may be. You can't equivocate about it. And I think that's the central point that has to be grasped here. And if sometimes it doesn't play out in the way that you hoped that it would, well, that's the system.
Indeed. And just to finish on the attack on the right to protest, the BBC's been doing a bit of work here, so let's put this one on screen. There we go. Slow walk protests banned at 1,200 locations. So this is an investigation that the BBC did. I just wanted to highlight a couple of points out of this. The scale of efforts by oil companies and public bodies to protect their premises from environmental protesters can be revealed in new BBC analysis. More than 400 demonstrators are named in court orders that restrict protests at more than 1,200 locations. The civil injunctions in force in places like oil terminals, petrol stations, racetracks across England and Wales also apply to persons unknown, meaning anyone can be prosecuted. The anti-protest injunctions limit what people can do, who they can associate with, and where they can go. The punishment for breaching one can be up to 2 years imprisonment or an unlimited fine, a heavier penalty than for the equivalent offences in criminal law. 8 have been taken out by oil companies, including Shell, Esso and ExxonMobil. National Highways for Transport for London account for 5 more, and the other 2 were taken out by local councils. And again, of course, the excuse for this draconian crackdown on protest is the likes of Just Stop Oil and so on. But if Just Stop Oil's behaviour is resulting in this type of limitation on the right to protest, that limitation on the right to protest applies to us all. And even if we don't agree with what Just Stop Oil is doing, and I personally don't, then we've still got to support their right to do it, because that is our right to also protest as well. So that is the main point I want to make there. But Charles, where does that take us to the Church of England?
It does. The Church of England, never far from a controversy of their own making. And here on Twitter, we have reference to the publication of a document about the heresy of racial injustice. And the document in question is Progress on Racial Justice Across the Church of England Dioceses, and this was published yesterday. The accompanying text is: racism is a heresy and a sin, and as Christians we have a responsibility to eradicate racism and exclusion in all its forms in the church, as well as our wider society. Now, that may well be the case, but if racism and the concept of race is reframed, then the outcomes are slightly different. So what we'll do is just have a quick look at a video that's been produced by the church to accompany this document.
So I've known no other church. This is my church. I grew up in the Caribbean, seeing reflections of myself in leadership within the church, within society as a whole. And then I came to England in 1979 as a teenager. And I looked around me and I couldn't see reflections of myself in leadership within the Church of England.
It's hard to describe to someone who is used to being the majority culture what it's like walking into a church and feeling like you're the only one. It's just a very hard feeling to capture, and I guess minorities from every ethnic group just learn to deal with that.
If you don't see yourself, then you don't know that you are welcomed, that you can be part of.
And so even though the church itself can be saying with words, you belong, you're welcome, everything about the situation communicates to you, I'm not part of this and I'm not welcome.
Quite strong language and inferences being drawn there. But the point I want to make is that racism appears to have shifted, according to the Church of England, into now something that may be viewed as passive, rather than taking active steps to discriminate against people of a different race. It's now deemed that it's okay to turn up in church and think that the institution or the people must be racist because they don't look like you. This comes from the Committee for Minority Ethnic Anglican Concerns, who describe their role as being to identify, monitor and take forward concerns of BAME Anglicans and make recommendations for change. So this is the key part. It is all about change, whether necessary or not. Further, they encourage the church to take positive action to increase the inclusion and representation of BAME people across the church. They encourage them to pursue vocations and to work with them to understand issues relating to BAME young people. Well, I would say that perhaps they're creating these issues and indeed indoctrinating them in order that they understand them in the way that the church wants them to. Promoting understanding of racism, racial issues and cultural diversity. Again, reframing there, advising and supporting the church. And for example, interestingly, the UK Minority Ethnic Mental Health Toolkit, as though the issue of mental health might be different depending on the colour of your skin. So the hijacking and the corruption of phrases like inclusion and diversity is extreme in this instance. It really is. And to suggest that the Church of England is now no longer an organisation where people are brought together by a shared belief system, but instead it must be according to skin colour or some other cultural point is quite extraordinary, or not, given the background. Now, we trace this back to what's called From Lament to Action, and this was precipitated by the death of George Floyd in May 2020, when most of the world was subjected to believing that Black Lives Matter was something they absolutely had to pursue and subscribe to, no matter what the beliefs they may have had previously. So this was started in June 2020 to implement significant cultural and structural change. Well, it looks like that is happening. And also that apologies and lament should be accompanied by swift actions leading to real change. Well, just a couple of years later, the Church Commissioners researched identifying historic links to transatlantic chattel slavery. Obviously, there's been a lot on that. But the bit that I want to get to, which is of great significance, is the funding side of it. Now, here we have the most recent report from the Church Commissioners about the investment policies of the church, and there's a timeline on the right there, which is probably too small to read, but the point of it is that in recent years, the amount of commitments towards net zero in particular, and increasingly what's being called racial justice, is very notable. And I've got arrows here that their spending plans are helping the church to transition to a lower carbon approach, step change in the area of racial justice, and also that within the last 3 years, there's an increase of 1.2 billion, which represents about 30% of the spending. So where's that going? 2022 figures here are highlighted because in the areas of housing, diocesan investment, racial justice and net zero, there was no funding allocated in 22, but in 23, that amounts to around 80 million. Now, I've written about this before, but the top 20 holdings in the church are very indicative of where the Church of England is attempting to push society. So within those top 20 holdings are companies like Applied Materials, which has pharmaceutical divisions, Dannatt, which has genomics, which we've talked about many times before, analog devices, looking at electronic surveillance and countermeasures, and of course, Merck, precision medicine with regard to the cancer genome, but also, and Mike was talking about this on the news on Monday, and Debbie's spoken about it many times before, human-derived organoids. But on the net zero side, of course, we have Google. This will be covered in more depth later. But on the net zero front, of course, the hypocrisy is outstanding. Google have announced figures just today or yesterday. And you see there the bottom line of each. 2022, there's been a significant uplift in what they call their greenhouse gas emissions between the year 2022 and 2023. So the Google are failing and the Church of England are still pouring money into them and all the rest of it. Now, if you want to look further into this, I did write about this in some detail based on previous reports by the Church Commission, in which it was very clear that despite their ethical investment policy, they are actually investing in pornography, weapons of military-grade military use, and embryonic stem cells. Now, obviously, we've just seen that that's now moving into areas of sort of AI and surveillance and all manner of other things. So none of this is accidental. And I return to the original point, which is what the church are doing, are trying to force change. And it is very hard to look at the Church of England now and believe that it is a meeting point for people who share a belief within the context of faith. It seems to be about every other agenda apart from that very one thing which should bind the people that belong to it.
Yes. Okay. Well, let's move back to the Middle East now. And what is the latest on Israel and their plans post whatever it is that they're doing at the moment, genocide?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm trying to keep an eye on the ball and following the direction of travel because there's an awful lot of confusing and contradictory rhetoric from Israeli officials, US officials, UK officials, EU officials. But what's interesting is that Israel keeps coming back to this post-genocide Gaza plan. So this was in the Financial Times, Israel to test, Hamas-free bubbles in post-war Gaza plan. Doesn't that sound cuddly? So let's have a look at what they're looking at doing. Israel is preparing to test an experimental model for running post-war Gaza by creating a series of bubbles that are designed. It actually takes me back to COVID, that are designed to be Hamas-free, but have been met with incredulity by many people briefed on the plan. The pilot scheme, a template for what Israel imagines would follow the war, will be launched in the northern Gaza neighborhoods of Atatra and Beit Hanun and Beit Lahia, which have been coming under heavy bombardment again. But even with the Israeli military on the cusp of starting the pilots, there is widespread skepticism over their viability given the violent opposition of Hamas and the resistance factions, infighting in Israeli Benjamin Netanyahu's government over the details, and tepid backing from Arab states. And it has been described as a fantasy project. So let's just have a quick look at the map just to see where these so-called bubbles are going to be piloted. So Atatra, Beit Lahia, and Beit Hanun, well in the north. And then going on as it continues in the Financial Times, the second person with knowledge of post-war Gaza added that Israeli attempts to identify local Palestinians who could run Gaza in Hamas's stead have been ongoing since November without any significant success. This plan is just the latest iteration. The idea in Israeli minds is that someone, the Arab states, the international community, will pay for it and locals in Gaza will run it, but no one is biting, the person added. And continuing just with on the ground humanitarian bubbles would then in effect be run by reps from the international and Arab coalition. So back to Egypt, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Jordan, local PA, Palestinian Authority, that are very much seen as proxies of the Zionist government, and private contractors and business people. Several people familiar said there were also plans to train up a local Palestinian force from inside Gaza to take over security and the humanitarian bubbles, which we assume are going to be programmed and de-radicalized from a Zionist perspective. Such a force would consist of former PA security personnel who would either travel to Jordan or the West Bank for training under the auspices of US Lieutenant General Michael Frenzel, the Jerusalem-based security coordinator between Israel and the PA. The PA's influential intelligence chief has already been vetting candidates from inside Gaza, with several thousand men identified as potential recruits, according to two people. So let's go back to a report that we did on UK Column News a few months ago when we talked about Netanyahu's dystopian vision for post-genocide Gaza. And you will remember then the so-called safe zones that have now been rebranded as humanitarian bubbles, where the so-called de-radicalized Palestinians would be segregated and corralled, and potentially to be used, of course, for slave labor. So, we keep coming back to the same idea, the same project, the same plan. And I think it's important just to keep our eye on that ball while everything is going on very much to confuse us.
Yeah, thank you for that. Now, let's just quickly move on to Ukraine. And, the Netherlands has announced that it is exporting 24 F-16s to Ukraine imminently. And, I'm just still wondering who's going to actually fly these things, first of all. So are they going to be flown by Western personnel? Is there anybody in the Ukrainian Air Force that's actually been trained to fly them yet? I don't think so. It takes a significant amount of time to train someone to fly one of these jets. And since it was only a couple of months ago that we saw the RAF announcing that some Ukrainian pilots had gone through basic training, they're not going to be in a position to fly these just yet. But in the meantime, the Russians have released some video of them destroying, if we can get it to run, here we go, destroying Su-27s on the ground. So I believe there were 2 actually destroyed, several others very badly damaged in this drone attack. So it's pretty clear that any F-16s heading into Ukraine aren't going to last too long, even if they do have anybody to fly them or they do get off the ground. In the meantime, there's an argument going on about intermediate range missiles at the moment because, if we think back, the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty was signed by Gorbachev and Reagan in 1987. And both countries at that time agreed to abandon nuclear and conventional ground-launched ballistic and cruise missiles with a range of 300 to 3,000 miles, let's say. But then beginning in 2014, the US was busy accusing Russia of being in non-compliance. So they were already building a narrative at that stage. And then they withdrew from the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty in 2019. Russia said that they would refrain from manufacturing or deploying any systems so long as the US didn't deploy them anywhere in the world. But there's been noise of the US doing quite the opposite at the moment. So now Putin is talking about restarting manufacturing of these. We'll come on to the likelihood of that in a second. But let's just have a look at Dmitry Peskov here, because he was commenting on whether there would be any disclosure if there was a deployment of intermediate range missiles by Russia. And he's saying it's obvious that such information is hardly likely to be disclosed. After all, this is an extremely sensitive field related to defense and security. At the same time, you see that the president is raising this issue, and accordingly, as the process with production and so on unfolds, some information will be accessible. So again, an escalation here. But again, this seems to be Russia reacting to what the United States is doing. But the United States has been building this narrative for quite some time. Now, in the meantime, we're seeing a lot of stuff in the Western press about whether Russia is actually capable of building these things. So here is, I think this was Irish media. Sorry, I've knocked the the branding off the top of this. Apologize for that. Russia has become so economically isolated that China could order the end of the war in Ukraine. Now, of course, this is a hit piece on China and really suggesting that China could step in and deal with Russia here. But the main thrust of the article is that as a result of sanctions, Russia's economy is so destroyed that it's impossible for it to continue expanding its military industrial capability. Well, that's a bit strange because this particular article seems to not be in line with this article from Rusi, which published around the same time. It's entitled "A Methodology for Degrading the Arms of the Russian Federation." It says, since its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Russia has continued to access critical components from abroad, expanded the production of core weapons, and continued to increase the sophistication of some key capabilities. So, the suggestion that Russia is unable to continue manufacturing weapons is completely ridiculous, but we continue the narrative suggesting that Russia is carrying out a hybrid war in the rest of Europe here, and that it's doing so in a much more kinetic way. So this is from the Institute for the Study of War. If we just expand the graphic, it's showing Western Europe and a number of incidents which are being blamed on Russia without any particular evidence. For example, an arson attack on a warehouse containing Ukrainian aid in Scotland. In Germany, planned arson attacks and explosions foiled by the authorities. In the Czech Republic, a failed arson attack targeting a bus depot. What on earth would an arson attack on a bus depot have to do with Russia? But okay, this is their claim. And of course, we were mentioning the fires in a couple of battery establishments recently in South Korea and this one in Glasgow, and the claim that Russia was somehow behind those as well. And at the same time, the Wall Street Journal pushing out this narrative that Russian saboteurs behind arson attack at German factory. So, this is a continuing narrative. But in the meantime, the Sun, just in time for the election here, has troop fears of Britain's armed forces no longer credible amid cuts to record low, warns ex-defence chief Lord Dannatt. And Charles, just in 2 seconds, I mean, this is something that we have been talking about for years, and I'm glad to see that the mainstream media finally starting to catch up.
Well, absolutely. But my take on it would be that the reason this is being done is in order to galvanise people for either conscription or national service, to make people sort of have some sense that the nation is in peril. We've got the threat from Russia, but also we've got the armed forces that are in an insufficient state, and therefore you've got to step forward and do what's right. I think that's the way it's being played.
Yes. Vanessa, let's come back to you. And, genocide tech is how this is being branded.
Yeah, I mean, this is just extraordinary. This was highlighted to me on X yesterday by an Italian investigative journalist. The Jerusalem Press Club organizes the 2024 Israeli Tech Media Tour. So it's inviting press from all over the world while it is committing an ongoing genocide in Gaza and has been for 9 months, to come and actually view the tech that is being used by the military to carry out that genocide. I mean, it's just extraordinary. Imagine if Russia were to do this. So I didn't have much time, so I quickly had a look at some of the organizations involved. It includes Cyabra Cyber Software, identifying misinformation and bad actors in the social media battle deployed by Elon Musk in his due diligence for, Twitter, now X. So I had a very quick look at this Cyabra, and it becomes suddenly very interesting. So it's basically an organization that uncovers the good, bad, and fake online. Does that sound familiar to anyone? Bear in mind, we've been talking consistently about the intelligence agencies or brigades within Israel that are then leaving the forces to establish their tech setup. And so let's have a look at who is involved in Cyabra and look at the transatlantic connections. So Mike Pompeo, formerly President Trump's kind of point man on the Middle East, but in particular on Syria, is a board member at Cyabra. Cyabra's dedication to proactive, cutting-edge threat detection aligns perfectly, and I'm excited to work with Cyabra as they provide a vital shield against nefarious manipulation efforts online. Then I had a quick look at the three CEO and co-founders, but I just picked one out because that was the most glaring connection to Israeli intelligence. Yosef Dar, co-founder and CPO. The other two also have similar connections. He was formerly head of department at Israeli military intelligence and team leader and project manager, again, at Israeli military intelligence, which could be Unit 8200. I mean, there are various units within the IOF that he could have been referring to. And then I just wanted to also show what Stefania Maurizi had put out on X. I'm convinced that this is one of the most monstrous and shameful initiatives that I have ever seen in 23 years of journalistic profession. A tool for journalists to publicize the technology, which, among other things, helps the war or the genocide of Israel against Gaza. And I would absolutely 100% agree with that. It is absolutely horrifying. And I'm going to dig further to see whether any British media were involved in the tour.
Okay, thank you for that, Vanessa. Let's move on then back to the UK and, in fact, to Finland, first of all, with bird flu.
Yeah, absolutely. But no, you are right to say the UK, because, of course, we will be there soon. Yes, Finland has proved to be the first domino to fall. An announcement here from the Global Centre for Health Security. Finland to start bird flu vaccinations for humans in world first. Now, if you've been watching UK Column, you will know that this was inevitable. But nonetheless, it was a race to see who'd get there first. The Finnish Institute for Health and Welfare declared that avian influenzas begin vaccine to be offered to persons at increased risk of infection. Well, what exactly does that mean? They say it's to be offered to people of 18 or over to risk of being infected with avian influenza because of their work or other circumstances, which is, of course, a little bit cryptic and could be applied to almost anything. But the significant detail here, and it won't come as a huge surprise, is that no avian influenza infections in humans in Finland so far. So it has never been detected in humans in Finland. Nonetheless, it says that it may be contracted from sick or dead animals or from their excretions. However, the avian influenza virus is poorly transmitted to humans, and in general, cases of infection are very rare. It goes on to say that the subtype H5N1, which has caused disease in wild farmed animals in Finland in the past few years, has also been linked with severe or fatal cases of the disease in humans. So they can't quite make their mind up. But this would be the point to make it clear and remind you that, of course, to be able to ascertain that there is bird flu in existence in the first place means reliance on the PCR test. And as we have been through many times, Kari Mallis, the man who invented it, made it very clear that it was not possible to tell from the PCR test whether you'd identified something that would make somebody ill or something ill, or that had made them ill, or that it could be passed to another person, or that it is evidence of something that may be referred to as a virus. So nonetheless, they push on. And of course, the goal to all of this is to get vaccines into people. And we've been talking about the European Medicines Agency and all the various things that they have on offer here. So we'll just look at the specifics of this now. And they say that there are 4 pandemic preparedness influenza vaccines that have been authorised in the EU, and tellingly that they can be rapidly modified to protect people. I've highlighted the text there below. Again, they reiterate they can be adapted to protect against any pandemic influenza virus strain if necessary. And they are only for use if the WHO or the EU were to officially declare a pandemic, which has not happened, and I've inserted the word yet. Also, at the bottom, of course, they blow the horn about the coronavirus disease vaccine, but also the H1N1 in 2009, which was a swine flu vaccine that ended up being withdrawn. So interesting that they would nonetheless draw attention to that. But we go back to something that I mentioned several weeks ago, which is this premise that this test result, I'm not going to refer to it as an illness because it is simply a test result, and they're referring to it as findings of influenza of avian origin in non-avian wildlife. Well, I wrote to the Animal and Plant Health Agency to ask questions about exactly what they meant by avian origin, and they've just got back to me today, funnily enough. So the first question, of course, was which other illnesses do they test for? And the answer is no other tests are carried out, well, that's absolutely to be expected, because if you want to look for something that you're going to call avian influenza, then that's the only thing you would look for. Also, how do they determine that it's of avian origin? I think they probably missed the point of my question, but they say by molecular analysis. Now, that is not scientific rigor. That is closed-loop reasoning, and I'm afraid does not meet the threshold that we should be expecting. I also asked for statistics on the number of tests. This is now in the UK over the last few years. So we look at 2022. Of the 106 tests conducted in the field, the return of negative results was 95, the absolutely overwhelming majority. 2023, similar story, 150 tests with 136 negative results. And again, I'm not trying to give any credence to the PCR test, because even if it is looking for a particular thing, of course, the amplification cycles make the result meaningless, whatever you do with it in this particular instance. And in 2024, little red arrows there, because of course the number of tests is 22 and the number of negative results is also 22. Exactly the same case that it will be a lot of the rest of the world, but here we are gearing up for injections into human beings. Now, if you missed it, I gave effectively a run through of how to establish a pandemic back on the 29th of May, which is the sort of overlay of the COVID template. So I'd recommend that you do look at that. And then the only other thing, which I don't have a slide of, but you might be interested to go and look at, is birdflusummit.com. Now, if Event 201 means anything to you, which was conducted in 2019 and was effectively a tabletop exercise about a forthcoming coronavirus pandemic that played out almost exactly to the letter of Event 201, birdflusummit.com should be of great interest. It happens in October this year, and I'll be keeping a very close eye on it and reporting on it in due course.
Okay, Charles, thank you very much. Thank you very much to Vanessa for joining us. We've got to finish there for today. I hope everyone has enjoyed today's program. If you're a UK Column member, join us for Extra in a couple of minutes. Don't forget the interview at 1 p.m. Tomorrow with J. Michael Waller, but otherwise we'll see you at 1 p.m. on Friday. See you then. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.